Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, I help you decide. Is that book worth reading of a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? That's what we're here to decide. So I'm not sure if I made a community post about it. I probably have. But to reiterate, if you're wondering why there's so many videos coming out this week and I missed my upload last week, yeah, this is why. A new puppy was introduced in the house. And potty training and watching a new puppy is a lot more difficult than it sounds. Say hi to the audience. But yeah, so I've been struggling with this guy for about a week now. Enjoy him. They grow up pretty fast, as one back here can attest to. But he's having trouble fitting in because the bigger dog is mean to him. Yeah, he's the reason things got delayed. Stop eating my beard. I'm afraid to put you down now, because if I put you down, you're going to go poop and pee in the house. Today's book is The Bridge to Terabithia, a children's novel that was written by Katherine Patterson and was published on October 21st, 1977. It's the holder of a number of literary awards, such as the Newbery Medal Award of the Year 1978, the Lewis Carroll Shelf Award of 1978, and the Zilverin Griffel Award in 1983, which is technically the runner-up award for a different prize, which is weird, but now the book has a rather interesting history, all things considered. That makes it a little more interesting to talk about in this backstory segment that you won't see in a lot of other books I put up here. For one, the story itself was originally inspired after her, considering what I'm about to talk about, I probably shouldn't be wrestling with a little puppy. Now, this book was originally inspired after Katherine Patterson's son, David, best friend Lisa Christina Hill, was struck and killed by lightning in 1974. The relationship between her son David and Lisa Christina Hill largely reflects itself in the relationship between the two characters Jesse Aaron and Leslie Burke have in this book, doing just about everything together, telling each other everything until the fateful day, and then representing the parents' struggle with not knowing how to really address this kind of grief to their kids. Even at the time of its release, the book was met with great critical reception and audience appreciation. And yet, despite that, the book has been constantly the target of censors. It ranks as number 8 in the most challenged book of 1990 to 1999, and number 28 from 2000 to 2009. The challenges tend to result from the death being a major factor as part of the plot, the frequent usage of the Lord outside of a religious context, basically taking the Lord's name in vain, and for promoting, and I quote here, secular humanism, New Age religion, occultism, and Satanism, and for the use of offensive language. Because yes, this is a satanic book to some people. Anyways, the book has since received 2 adaptations. The first was in 1985, which was a PBS TV movie featuring Annette O'Toole, Julian Coates, and Julie Bulau. David Patterson, the son of Katherine Patterson, once referred to this version as the crazy cousin in a mental hospital that no one wants to talk about. And no one on our side was either involved with it or happy with the final product. A ringing endorsement if I've ever heard one. In 2007, a theatrical movie was released, this time with David Patterson's involvement with the film, to some degree, and featuring a young Josh Hutcherson, Zooey Deschanel, Anna Sophia Robb, Robert Patrick, and Bailey Madison. But that's enough about the backstory. So here's the rating card. Green doesn't look good on you. You gonna be nice to him? And then we move on to the cover. A basic cover discussion. A book released almost 50 years ago, the winner of a Newbery Medal Award, and having received 2 film adaptations, there's a number of covers for this book, and I couldn't possibly cover them all without making a dedicated video to it. So it'd be impossible to talk about one in specific. I'm looking over the various versions of it. Honestly, they're all kind of stellar. Honestly, I'm even going to go on record and say that the movie poster version of the book still kind of works, all things considered. While it's certainly very low on the list of which ones I like the most, I would honestly say that it's one of the very few covers I found that replaces the book cover with the movie poster that I kind of like. And even the worst one, and while it's certainly very low on the list of which ones I like the most, it still very much works for the book. The very few covers I found that I would honestly say I didn't like, and even the worst one I found, I still kind of like because this uses actual illustrations from the book on it. And playing into either the fantasy of the world Terabithia and or acknowledging the simplistic normalcy both works really well for the books. All in all, I do think it's great. But what is the story about, you might ask? Well, if you've seen neither adaptation or read the book, I did read the back of the book on my TBR, which I want to say I'm really proud of the thumbnail for that, even if it's one of my worst viewed videos of all time at this point. But anyways, I think reading the back of the book is pretty important, as that is what the book deemed good enough to help you construct a foundation of expectation. The book is preparing you for what's inside, and the back of the book is pretty important to gauging expectations and setting a reading experience for you. You don't want a back of the book telling you a story about something it's not, because then that creates disappointment. But for the sake of this review, a quick context is, farm boy Jess Aaron wants to be the fastest runner in school. However, one day, a tomboy named Leslie Burke moves into the farmhouse next to him, and proves not only to be the fastest runner of the girls, but the fastest runner in the school, even compared to Jess Aaron's. Despite this, Jess finds himself drawn to this new girl, forming a fast and strong relationship with her, which is only strengthened when they create their fantastical world of Terabithia together, a place where they can rule together as king and queen. However, before long, tragedy strikes. And yeah, that's basically a repackaged version of the book synopsis, because the book has a pretty perfect synopsis on the back. I do stand by my one less line critique I've mentioned in the TBR, but otherwise it's great. But did this book hold up once I took off the rose-tinted goggles? You know, I'm going to have to buy actual rose-tinted goggles to make that line work. Yes, it did. Much like The Land by Mildred D. Taylor, which is not something I intended to bring up twice this month, but it is brought up. This is a book I'm glad I returned to for this channel. While I did love it as a kid, I did miss a couple of the other various elements of the book that really work in its favor on a reread. In my TBR, I mentioned that a main thing I remember this book being about is teaching about grief and how to handle it. But this book is so much more than that, which is impressive considering it doesn't even reach 200 pages. Okay. Alright, we're going to have to have a talk here. I'll be right back. This book is just as much about grief of unexpected tragedy as it is about casting tradition. This book is just as much about the grief of unexpected tragedy as it is about casting down the traditional attitudes of society. One of the more striking themes of this book that surprised me was this book is very critical of what would be considered gender norms at the time. Jess Aarons is a farm boy in the South, and not only is expected to be tough and no nonsense, but he's supposed to work hard and not complain, while also picking out a manly career. He's the kind of guy who, if his dad saw crying, his dad would say, "I'll give you something to cry about," and then hit him. His hobby and passion of art is scoffed at by his emotionally distant father, and we see pretty early on that Jesse is envious of the fact that his father allows himself to be more emotionally available to his sisters rather than himself, wishing that one day his dad would just pick him up and hug him, like he does with the sisters. Will you just breast? And when you look at Leslie, it becomes even more clearer. The reason her and Jesse get along so well is because Jesse is one of the only people who accept her as she is, a tomboy. She likes to run, wear pants, play in dirt, and all of that. People are reluctant to be near her because they don't really understand how a girl can like all this. These are guy things to like. Whereas Jess, on the other hand, seems largely to just accept her as she is, as I said. The reason the two get so close is because they're outsiders from their peers because of the gender norms. And it's only through the mutual understanding of each other that they come to see this in each other and become so close. Furthermore, the book really makes you feel the connection, which in turn makes the eventual tragedy all that much harder. This is a spoiler. Considering this book is almost 50 years old and has received at least one well-known adaptation, even if it did get critically panned because of its misleading marketing, I think the twist is somewhat obvious. But for the sake of fairness, here's a blanket spoiler warning from here on. If you haven't read this book and want to go in blind, or same of the movie, I would recommend stopping here and skipping ahead to the conclusion. You just don't rest, do you? Now, when Leslie dies in the book, one of the great things I think this book does is that it doesn't just tell you that Jess Aarons is sad. We actually see his grief. We see his denial when it first happens. We see the numbness that occurred when he finally was able to absorb the information a little bit. We see his anger, and then we see his eventual acceptance of what happened. I also love how this is a moment for Jess to see past the general facade of most of the adults in his life. In the aftermath of Leslie's death, Jess not only sees how much his father actually loves him, just simply struggles to express it due to how his father was taught to be a man, he learns the hidden depths of even his teacher, who he's more or less mocked throughout the book as she comforts him and expresses her own experience with loss like this. We see even some hidden depths from his two older sisters, who for almost the entirety of the book play the role of bratty older siblings who have little redeeming qualities in Jess's eyes. It's weird how this grief brings out the best in the people around Jess and allows them to see the world in a much more nuanced way. An interesting fact I learned while researching this in the background of the book is that the author had even planned to make Leslie's death match exactly how her son's friend Lisa Hill died, with a lightning strike. However, the editors of the book expressed that they believed the readers would find this too unlikely and asked her to change it into something more likely to happen in the story she set, which is a little understandable. Even though the weather around the time it happens is described as stormy and cloudy, I think the choice to make it the drowning is way better because it even adds that sense of survivor's guilt onto Jess's grief, because the only reason Jess didn't go with her that day to Terabithia is because his art teacher called and wanted to take him to the Smithsonian for something. If I did have one criticism of the book, and mind you, this was a very, very minor criticism overall, is that there isn't much conflict throughout the majority of it. The book really takes off after the death of Leslie, largely because now we're in major emotional conflict throughout the story. But for the most part, the rest of the book is just a nice, cozy read about two people becoming inseparable friends, and their struggle with the gender identities and traditions of their town. It's a good read. But that comes at the cost of removing some of the more interesting plot threads that were created early. You would think with its inclusion on the back of the book and its big focus in the first few chapters, the element that the long-running that their foot races would be a large part of their identities. But that element is largely dropped after the chapter where Leslie and Jess becomes friends. You would think that perhaps the author would expand a little more on Jess's crush on his music teacher, which is clearly more of an infatuation born from the teacher being one of the few people who openly appreciates and encourages his artistic talents. But the plot point it kind of is in the background for most of the book and is largely forgotten about unless the author actively wants to play with it in that scene. You might even think the story of Janice Avery might see some focus, being one of the major bullies throughout the book, and then the startling revelation that her father is physically abusive, which is why she's such a bully in the first place. But after Leslie learns this, and Janice and her basically bury the hatchet, Janice disappears from the book. We don't even see Janice during the grieving scenes when involved in Leslie's death, despite Leslie claiming her and Janice were at least half friends.
Look, your uncle died. I'm sorry. I get it. I'm sorry. Okay.
We don't see any follow-up, and at most we get a token statement kind of condemning the actions of her father. But Jess mostly talks about how in the area he lives, you didn't tell anyone your family problems. That Janice letting it slip that her father physically abuses her is considered bad form because that's just not what you did. And again, like I said, the book challenges traditions. Now, this is largely forgivable from a literary sense because this book was published in 1977. So the attitude towards something as severe as child abuse were kind of different. Heck, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act was barely 3 years old at the point in which the story was released, which largely marked when we started, as a nation, to take child abuse seriously on a federal level. So unfortunately, while I don't like it, it is understandable why the book, written at that time period, has a sort of laissez-faire manner of talking and dismissing the child abuse that occurs in the story. All in all, though, that was largely a minor nitpick in the overall grand scheme of the story that I love so much upon reading again. So, to give this book a rating, I'd give it a firm 9 out of 10. Look, much I love you, you were on my lap and you were snapping near my sensitive areas. You need to snap upwards, not to the side. I think one of the things that truly helps how this book held up is that while it's definitely something that requires the setting of 1970s to work, the core message throughout it is pretty timeless. It deals with gender norms and deals with themes such as grief and loss. And that's something that will always be relevant no matter how in the future we get. Overall, like I said, this is one of the few books I'm really glad. Not just I'm glad I reread it, but I'm glad I reread it. Like, rereading it gave me a brand new appreciation of this book that I didn't quite have just with my memory. And that's because it's a lot more nuanced than I remembered it as being. I think this is a book that would function both really well as a children's book, or even if you wanted to read it today as a 30-year-old. It's a little simplistic, again, but that is because it's a children's book. And like I said, it does drop things, but it's also forgivable in the sense that this is kids, so I can totally believe kids would be all about one thing for like a week and then drop it and be all about something else. Even with the whole running thing, even in the story, it feels less like Jess Aarons wants to be the fastest runner in school, and more that he latched on to being the fastest runner because it was a thing his peers respected more than his art. And he was good at it. Not that he didn't like running, but that's the main reason he wanted to run. I don't remember much about how the movie held up. It's been a long while since I've actually watched the movie with Josh Hutcherson, because that was the version I watched as a kid. I remember it being marketed very much like a Narnia ripoff. But maybe I might take a look at it for one of my, yes, that was a book reviews later on. Although, I've been thinking I probably have to find a new name for that series, considering that, yes, that was a book, tends to work best if a book in question has been largely displaced by the adaptation. And I do want to talk about things that were very obviously everyone knows was a book. Like, I don't know if I do Hunger Games. That's one of those ones that got covered a lot. But things like this, Bridge of Terabithia, I'm pretty sure most people knew it was a book going in. But whereas things like I Know What You Did Last Summer, I don't think anyone I mentioned that, hey, by the way, this was a book, actually knew it was a book before I told them. So, I probably need a new name for the series. But with that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having. Even the bad ones. So there, everyone. I'm going to get him trained. But expect me to be playing with the puppy a lot, because if I let him go, he will go around, eat stuff off the floor, and poop everywhere. Because dogs are poop machines for some reason. Rah!